Hello again, everybody. This is CJ, your local friendly technology addict, and you are watching the Tech Addict's Attic. And you know, it's like 2:30 in the morning, and trying to stay awake, and it's just not working for me. Anyway, I had an exciting day today, and I wanted to share. Otherwise, I wouldn't be doing this video because I was planning on waiting until after the new year. I took the wife and kids down to see my parents, and they live far enough away that I wanted to make the most of my time. So I'm sitting there picking my dad's brain for stuff. Now, my father, he's been modifying radios since before I was born. Back when the American Citizens Band had only 23 or 27 channels and the FCC required a license to operate on those channels, he had a license. He was also a member of a couple of different CB clubs at the time. He had to put his hobbies on hold while raising me and my siblings, but after pretty much everybody but me moved out, he was able to get back into his hobbies. Money was a little bit more available, and time was more available, as well as interest. So, you know, he wasn't having to constantly fix something because somebody was constantly breaking something. You know, so many of us kids, things get worn out, and he was a jack of all trades. We couldn't afford to have a repairman come all the time, so he learned how to fix just about everything that we had. Long story short, I'm proud to call my father my father. He's the most intelligent man I've ever known, and he can teach himself anything, has taught himself so many things. Jack of all trades, master of a few. You've heard the saying, jack of all, master of none. Well, he actually is a master of a few. And those that he's not a master of, he's pretty well versed in anyway. So, I digress. I'm picking my dad's brain about Bob here. Now, you all know Bob, Blackview BV9500 Pro. I've been doing some trials with Bob involving an antenna that I constructed. If you look at my channel, I'll try to put a link to it if I remember, because it's awful early in the morning, I may forget. But I've got a video where I constructed this antenna. And since that video was made, I've already made one or two small modifications to it, but nothing major. But anyway, I noticed some characteristics of that particular antenna, and a couple of, we'll call them beacons. They're not beacons, but a couple of transmitters that are on 24/7, and I know their locations within a mile or so. So I basically know where these things are, and I know what frequency they're on, and I know what kind of signal to expect from them. So I'm going to call them beacons. I know that one of these beacons is, I don't want to give out too much information. Let's just say that it's west. Okay, let's say it's due west, 270 degrees from my house. If I point this antenna right at that 270 degrees, the signal goes away. If I point it north or south, signal comes back. Point it directly away, and of course I get nothing. Well, that seems kind of counterintuitive. If I've got a directional antenna, which a 4-element Yagi should be, then it would make sense that when I point it directly at the signal source, I should get the most signal strength. Well, the other beacon, you know, when I point it at that beacon, the same thing happens. I have to point it, you know, a good almost 90 degrees off of where it's at in order to be able to receive the signal with any kind of quality. Well, it got to a point where I'm trying to find something here I can use. So it got to the point where I realized if I took the antenna's BNC connector, which more on this in a moment, if I took that BNC connector and I just ever so barely had it on there. Now, this is a front-facing camera, so there's no focus, so I apologize that this is out of focus. But you can see here, you got on the bayonet connector, the BNC, you got these two little ears here, and they go into a slot, okay, on that round shell. And what you're supposed to do is push it on all the way and then rotate it. You know, this isn't the best connector to use. Let me grab this one. So, better connector is this little T here, because I can hold it easier. So anyway, you're supposed to push it on all the way and then rotate the shell. You may have heard that click. Okay, that click is the ear. Not that you could really see it, but it's that ear. Can we zoom in? Yes, we can. Still out of focus, so I'm sorry, people. But you can kind of get an idea. You're supposed to be able to rotate it 90 degrees or so and it click into place. Well, if I do that, I lose the signal. I wind up with it, where I point the antenna right at the beacon and I lose the signal. I realized if I did not push it on all the way, just ever so barely get that ear, right, just inside this one larger flange there, just like so, I would get the best signal strength. And the antenna would be directional. So my antenna was working. Okay, great. And I could point it right at the beacon. Unfortunately, this meant I had to hold the cable a certain way. Okay, now back to the phone for a second. We're going to sidestep here, but you'll understand why in a second. So first off, I want to share a little pro tip. This is a Torx T5 screw. Very tiny, very tiny. But if you loosen it about a half a turn, see, from the factory, when you put your antenna on, you have to fold this thing back. Eventually, that's going to crack the rubber. But if you loosen that screw about a half a turn, you can take this and spin it around so that it's not being folded back, maybe a little bit, but not nearly as badly. You still don't lose it, and you still have the waterproofing that it provides when you have it in place. Also, if you don't know, that is an SMA male. Yes, SMA male, Sierra Mike Alpha male. In order to use a BNC antenna, which is pretty common in amateur radio, or any kind of antenna other than SMA, you will of course need an adapter. This is an SMA female to BNC female. And it just threads into place. I forget what BNC stands for. I know B is bayonet, and it's very similar to T and C in dimensions, and T means threaded. And the N was Neil, or Neilman, or something like that, and the C was somebody else's name, but I can never remember what they are, because they're kind of, it's not exactly like Smith Johnson, right? It's some strange to me name. But anyway, what I was finding is I was having to put the connector barely on it and then holding the cable behind the phone like so. It would put enough tension to hold this in place at the right point, and I would get it all set up on the beacon, and then I was trying to pick up satellites. More on that in a moment. But I was talking to my father about this, because what I thought was that I simply had a defective adapter. And what I was trying to do in testing this theory, I have a series of adapters. I actually have a 4-pack of SMA to BNC, male and female, both ways on each one. So I basically get BNC female, okay, 2 of those. One is SMA male, the other is SMA female, right? But both of them are BNC female. And then, of course, I've got the other 2 that are BNC male, but SMA male and SMA female, right? So, between the set of them, I believe at one point I had this one in the phone. And then, I don't have a coupler, but I do have a T. Now, I'm just receiving, so I don't care that that's not the most efficient way to couple a signal. But basically, I was doing something kind of like that. And even then, anytime I pushed the cable all the way on, I would lose signal strength whenever I pointed it directly at the beacon. So I still wound up, well, long story short, just for grins and giggles, I had this monstrosity hanging off of the back of the phone, and including 3 Ethernet terminators. More on that in a moment. So when I had that monstrosity hanging off of the back of it, I actually was able to pick up the signal. You know, you would think that that would diminish the signal. You would think that would make it worse, but instead, I was getting evidence that it was making it stronger. So I was discussing all of this with my father. Well, I wanted to show him. Of course, today I had the BNC female adapter on it, and I took my Yagi antenna, which of course is just heavy and cumbersome enough that makes it so I'm just going to use this as a demonstration. I would very barely put it on there with the antenna pointed in the direction of the beacon, and it didn't work. Like, that's odd. I pushed it all the way on and clicked it in place, and then I got a perfect signal. Right? It didn't make sense. I mean, at home, that got me a worse signal. Whereas finagling it to be just at the right spot got me a better signal. Made no sense. And then it hit me as I'm sitting there demonstrating this to my father. It's almost like at home, where I'm closer to the beacon, putting it all the way on overpowers the receiver to the point of desensitization. And I looked at my father and I'm like, is that possible? Can it do that? And he's like, absolutely. Of course it can do that. You just got too much signal going into your receiver. And he says, that tells me that you've got a high Q receiver. Well, Q basically means quality, but there's more to it than just simply the word quality. There's calculations go into it and whatnot. But basically, Q is a rating of quality of the receiver. I don't know if it's how well it rejects bad signals or noise or whatever, or what the deal is. But regardless, Q is a rating of quality. So after he's telling me all of this, he also says basically what would happen is when you take your beam and you point it directly at your beacon, you'll lose your signal. Well, of course, because you're overpowering the receiver. But when you turn it away, then you start getting a better signal. Well, of course, because now you don't have the directors or the reflector improving the gain. You basically have the same gain you would have with just the dipole. It made sense. I'm like, okay. Well, let me try something else here. So, I continued the conversation. We finished it up. But later on, as my kids and my nephew were there, and had a niece, and basically the kids were starting to get bored, and I'm like, okay, well, you know what? These 2 kids who aren't interested in this stuff, they want to do something else. We'll let them do something else. I'll take these other kids and we'll go hunt for satellites. So there's a great little app if you go to the Play Store. It's called Heavens Above. And it looks a little something like this. Now what you have here is a sky chart, okay? Now you'll notice east and west are backward, because what you're supposed to do is hold it over your head with north behind you and south in front of you, and then east and west will be on the right positions, because that's the way the sky would look if you were looking up at it, right? So anyway, with of course right now it's 2:30 in the morning, there are not going to be any visible satellites. It'll show you visible satellites because if you're just after sunset or just before sunrise, and the satellite can reflect sunlight back at you enough that you can see it, and by the way, this does work, then it would show them here. But let's say instead that I'm looking for specifically a radio satellite. Well, here we are. we've got CubeSat, okay? And CubeSat's going to be going... CubeSat has a 400 megahertz downlink. I can pick this up on this phone. But I'm not going to for this video, but I'll show you something. I'm out there with this satellite app, tracking satellites, watching them, seeing what can go on. And I pull one up that... I forget what it says. It was one of the NO. I want to think NO84 or NO72, one of those. And I barely, just for a moment, got a signal from it. You hear the static, right? And then you hear static that gets cut. As if there's a signal coming in. Okay, I know that wasn't the greatest impression, but... Well, let's see here. I'm going to pull up. That one was just enough to whet my appetite to try another one. The next one I tried was KKS1, which, as luck would have it, was going straight overhead, like 84 degrees elevation. So that's about the best you can hope for, because that gives you the longest time to try to pick it up. And pick it up I did. I have been trying for days, no, weeks now, to receive a satellite. And what I've been doing wrong this entire time is that little trick where I've only barely gotten that on there. Well, that's great. That's great for attenuating the signal from the beacons, but I don't want to attenuate a signal from a satellite. They're weak enough as it is. Now that I know that, now that I know that my antenna actually is working, and my coax is working, and my connectors are working, and they're not defective, now that I know all of this, I'm able to go in, pull up the intercom app, and I did a screen record because I don't really have any other way of recording. Even though I can record what it receives, if it receives breaks in static, all you're going to get is like a second long break in static. So I needed to do the screen record, so I'm glad that Blackview included that as a function of this phone. So... Now, what you can't see because this won't focus, right here is Mars. You heard that long stretch of static. I took the antenna and pointed it at my dad's house. Well, of course, the satellite's up in the air, so if I point it at my dad's house, I should only get static, and I did only get static. After a moment, I pointed it at Mars because I could see the track is going right across Mars. Not quite there yet. There I'm pointing it at Mars, and I'm waiting for the satellite to cross the beam. My aim was not that great, or maybe the time is off by a few seconds. Either way, once it crossed Mars, you can hear it starting to come back. I'm picking up a satellite with this phone. And I think that confirms it. So, if you all have this phone, you can make your own Yagi, and you can go satellite hunting. If you're into that kind of thing, right? But you know, hey, it's cool. Kids love it. So let's look at the live. Actually, we'll just look at radio satellites. CubeSat. Nah. By the time I get all this set up and everything, it'll be long gone. But, you know, we got Oscar coming up here in a little bit. Maybe I'll try to receive that one. Question is, can I receive it inside my house, or do I have to go outside for it? I don't know. Anyway, I wanted to share. That was my excitement for the day. I picked up a couple of satellites and on an antenna that I built. Now, if you go back and look at the videos that I've already done, you can see how I constructed the antenna, and I give on the sheet of paper beside the antenna, I give the dimensions. It's a time lapse video, so it's sped up about 10 times, I think, 10 speed. It may even be more than that, maybe 30. But it's only about a 10-minute long video, but it took me about 30 or 45 minutes to make the antenna. But you can see the dimensions that I used. You can see what kind of wire I used. It's just number 10, 10 gauge electrical wire. If you have a strip of Romex, you know, you can just cut that up a couple of times and you've got enough cable or enough wires to make an antenna, and you wouldn't need much, right? Hot glue gun, and then some BNC cable. Okay, and that's, I'm going to do another video, and I'll upload that in a minute, but only because it's not really related. It is, but it's not. So that was my excitement for the day. Like I said, I wanted to share. You can pick up satellites with your BV9500 Pro. And you thought that all you were going to use it for was a two-way FRS radio. No, you can do more than that with it. And if this kind of thing interests you, hey, I recommend study up and get your amateur radio license. Get a call sign, and then you can actually start learning radio with a radio. And this is a cheap radio. You can get them even cheaper. You can get a $30 two-way Baofeng, or however you pronounce it. And they're good to have, I guess. I haven't gotten one yet. I'm planning to, just to have something, you know, to play with. But yeah, it's exciting for a nerd like me. Anyway, I'm going to go ahead and stop this one and do the next video. I'm going to do some pro tips and whatnot about the phone. Well, not really pro tips, but just some information that might help you out if you're interested in this kind of stuff. And if not, then just skip it. But hopefully I haven't wasted your time. Hopefully you find it as interesting as I do. And, well, stay tuned and you'll see the next video. Until then, I'm CJ, your local friendly technology addict, and this is the Tech Addict's Attic. Hope you had a Merry Christmas.